the radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Yaron Brook Show. I hope you're all having a wonderful evening. I just came back from a good meal and ready to do the show. So a couple of things I want to do today. I guess I'm behind on a lot of stuff. Whoops. Let me just... Why is this not broadcasting? 1 second, sorry. Little problem. Let's see if that'll go live. All right, that's live. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this wonderful, Wednesday evening. Thanks for being here again. I want to do a few things today. I'm going to take a super chat question, so that's always available. Please feel free to jump in. I do want to revisit some of the stuff we talked about yesterday about the Middle East, about Syria and Turkey, primarily given Trump's comments today. So I just want to comment on his comments and his tweets about the Middle East. I think it's important. And a couple of economic issues I want to raise that relate to wages and bad news, and everybody's focused on bad news. I know that I owe somebody a super chat question on subjective value versus objective value, which is a big issue in the philosophy of economics and in Ayn Rand's view of economics versus kind of the Austrian school of economics. We'll be talking about that in one of the future shows. I'm going to have an expert come on the show to talk about it. So we're going to have a conversation about it. I've emailed him. I'm hoping he agrees to do it. Maybe this weekend. We'll see. But we'll try to get him on the show soon. All right. So super chat, Middle East, some economic stuff, and that should make for a good show. Let's start with the Middle East. So as expected, this morning the Turks invaded Syria. Basically attacking the Kurdish positions across the Turkish border, basically starting to wipe out the military capabilities of the Kurds, right? And Turkey's not fighting terrorism. There's no terrorism there that they're fighting. These are Kurdish fighters who've been fighting together with the United States to eviscerate ISIS. They are Turkish fighters who might, over the years, some of them, a small minority of them, might have participated in terrorist activity to try to establish an independent Kurdish state. And those who are terrorists, what do the Kurds need? An independent Kurdish state. But of course, these Kurds are in Syria. They're not in Turkey. We've got pro-Turkey fans who have joined our chat, calling me a Marxist. They have no idea who I am, and talking about Kurds as terrorists. The fact is that Kurdistan in Iraq, as I said yesterday, is the freest country, freer than Turkey. It's more hospitable to free speech, more hospitable to opposition parties, more hospitable to markets and to property rights than is Turkey. So if I had to choose between Kurdistan and Turkey, I would definitely go with Kurdistan. But the fact is the Kurds have fought on our side. And I covered this yesterday. I don't want to repeat myself. The Turks have gone in today to destroy that Kurdish capabilities. The Kurds have not engaged in terrorist activities against Turkey in recent years. Indeed, the main terrorist activities against Turkey in the last 10 years have been from ISIS. And yet Turkey didn't do anything about ISIS. Indeed, it helped ISIS. It facilitated ISIS. It funded ISIS. It gave them a safe harbor. So indeed, Turkey has been on the wrong side of the whole battle against ISIS. But I want to address. So today, Trump said, kind of in offhand remarks, he says, let's see. He said, it's going to be easy to find other allies in the Middle East. What's the big deal? So we've lost the Kurds as allies. We betrayed the Kurds as allies is a better way to put it. And he says they didn't help us in World War II. They didn't help us in Normandy. They were only interested in fighting for their land. I guess Kurdistan first, maybe like America first. Why wouldn't they be interested? So, we don't need the Kurds. We could get other allies because, hey, they're only interested in fighting for their own land, and they weren't there for World War II. I mean, it's just, it's so ignorant of this president that it's strikingly funny. And then he says, with all of that said, we like the Kurds. They're good guys. They like the Kurds. He didn't want to be, the disrespect, the unseriousness, the frivolous nature of his commentary, and the fact that he just doesn't understand. He has no clue about who the Kurds are, what they're fighting, what an ally means, how you get an ally, how you keep an ally. None of that means anything to him. The world is a zero-sum game. The world is moment by moment, minute by minute, to be analyzed, to be diagnosed. There is nothing here that is long-term. There is no strategy. There is no big picture. There is no America first. All right, then he tweets, and this is what I think is part of the concerns. He says, the United States has spent $8 trillion fighting and policing in the Middle East. I doubt that number's true, but it doesn't matter. Thousands of our great soldiers have died or been badly wounded. All horrible things. Why are we there? Why are we spending trillions of dollars? And why have thousands of our troops been badly wounded? I agree with all of that. Millions of people have died on the other side. True. Going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made in the history of our country. I guess it's worse than slavery, worse than World War I. Have you ever read about World War I? Have you ever read about the lack of any American interest in going into World War I? The number of Americans who died in World War I far, far, far exceeds all the casualties in all the decades that have died in the Middle East. But he says, the worst decision ever made in the history of our country. I mean, what do you even do with that? What do you even do with that? What about Vietnam? What about Vietnam? Much worse decision. Many, 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 many more casualties. We lost that war. We had to evacuate at the end in a panic because the enemy had run South Vietnam, in spite of the fact that we just signed a peace deal with the North Vietnamese, signing treaties with evil, negotiating, pretending they're your friends, never, ever, ever works. Vietnam is a good example of that. So, worst decision ever made in the history of our country? Now, this is not me being anti-Donald Trump, I don't think. Right? This is what he said. And it's stupid. It's stupid. Now, I know some of you think it's got to do with the 4D chess he's playing. He's playing 4D chess. There's a grand strategy here. He's saying things that are just blatantly untrue because he's manipulating the enemy. And I, Yaron Brook, am too stupid to figure it out. Man. He continues. This is in a continuation tweet. We went to war under a false and now disproven premise. Weapons of mass destruction. There were none. Now we are slowly and carefully bringing our great soldiers and military home. Our focus is on the big picture that the U.S. is greater than ever before. Really? Why? What evidence? Anyway, what troubles me is this. He presents us as if we went into the Middle East just to be the policeman of the world. We went into the Middle East because of the excuse of weapons of mass destruction. I want to get back to weapons of mass destruction later. But that's just ahistorical. That's just completely untrue. It completely evades the fact that we were attacked on 9/11. It completely evades a whole chain of terrorist attacks against the United States by Muslims, motivated by the ideology of Islamism, by radical Islam, by Islamic totalitarianism, by jihadism, that is centered, that is motivated, that is driven by actors in the Middle East. Now, it happens to not be the actors we attacked. It was in Iraq. But okay, but then you say we attacked the wrong people. But that's not what he's saying. He said we should have never been there. But there's a reason we were there. We were attacked. The proposition what he's proposing, what he's telling us, is the story that no, the Middle East is this unrelated place. It's a place in the world that has nothing to do with us Americans. And then we just went there because George Bush was an idiot, or because we thought there were weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, or for 500 different reasons. But that's not why we went. Now, weapons of mass destruction was an excuse that the Bush administration used. It was a stupid excuse even then. But, weapons of mass destruction are an issue. Indeed, why has Trump withdrawn from the agreement with Iran? Well, because he thinks, supposedly, that they're going to cheat and, in spite of the treaty, develop what? Weapons of mass destruction. So weapons of mass destruction is a huge issue in the hands of the wrong people. And certainly in the hands of Iran, it's a huge issue. Now, I don't think it was an issue in the hands of Saddam Hussein. I don't think it was a huge issue in the hands of the Syrians for America. But, for example, in Iran, it is a huge issue. So to claim that weapons of mass destruction doesn't matter is, again, ignorant. But the evasion that the only reason the United States went to the Middle East is because of some random whim, that the only reason the United States went into the Middle East is because of weapons of mass destruction, is just nonsensical. We have an enemy over there. Like it or not, we have an enemy. There are people over there planning and scheming to kill Americans, to kill our allies, to destroy our allies. So one, it's not true we should have never gone to the Middle East. Yes, we did it badly. Yes, we went to the wrong places. Yes, we used as the wrong reason. Criticize that. We should have never stayed so long. Absolutely. But we should have won first. Absolutely. We didn't go to win. We didn't engage in military tactics that would lead to winning. We left suitcases of cash so that they would love us. And those suitcases and cash found their ways to where? They found their way to ISIS. So this idea that we should never have been in the Middle East is just ludicrous. It evades the actual real threat that Iran poses, that supposedly Donald Trump claims that he recognizes. It's why he withdrew from the treaty. That Saudi Arabia poses. Now, granted, nobody but me seems to think Saudi Arabia poses a threat to anybody, but I think it does. Those are countries that need it and need to be dealt with, as do Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, which is training, by the way, in Venezuela. That's not a conspiracy theory. They're in Venezuela. They are training, responsible for the bombing. Bombings in Argentina. They have a significant presence in South America, not that far from the American border. And if you worry about the southern border, you're worried about Hezbollah coming across. Well, if you want to deal with Hezbollah, you don't build a wall on the Mexican border. You go to where they live and you destroy them. Hezbollah, Hamas, Islam, Muslim Brotherhood, you could go on, Islamic Jihad, you could go on and on and on with the different organizations, the different entities, funded by both the Iranians and certain elements within the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia. That is the enemy. That's what needs to be destroyed. You don't leave the Middle East, you destroy the enemy. So the evasion, the ignorance, the sheer stupidity that is embodied in Trump's, in Trump talking about the Middle East, talking about foreign policy, is truly mind-boggling. Truly mind-boggling. I mean, he is just another Obama. Just another Obama. And as I said yesterday, he has now caused all our allies in the Middle East and elsewhere to question whether America will really stand by them. And again, I've never advocated for American troops needing to help Israel. I've never advocated for one dime of American taxpayer money going to Israel. All I believe our allies want from us is our moral support, which our allies, for example, in Hong Kong are not getting, and sale of weapons. That's it. Do they believe they're going to have it when they need it? Not anymore. Not anymore. So, I mean, and on top of that, by the way, on top of that, no American troops have left Syria. Zero. All they did is move a few special forces unit from the Syrian border with Turkey further south, away from the action, to allow the Turks to come in and not risk hurting any Americans. Thomas asks, isn't Hezbollah the reason why Israel has built a wall around it? No. Hezbollah is a threat only in its northern border, and indeed the fact that Israel has built walls is a sign of its weakness. It's a sign of its defeat. It's a sign of its unwillingness to go out and crush the enemy. Walls, you build walls when you've given up. You build walls when you don't have the self-esteem, the courage, the moral fiber to go and destroy your enemy. So you play defense. No country has ever won a war playing defense. You want to destroy Hezbollah? Israel could do it in weeks if it was willing to inflict the casualties on the enemy that such a victory would necessitate. Israel's not willing to inflict those casualties because it doesn't have the moral fiber, the moral backbone to do it. Neither does America. That's why it can't win. That's why we didn't win in Iraq. That's why we're not winning in Syria. That's why we're going to hightail it out of the Middle East with our tail between our legs and only emboldened, further emboldened, the radicals, the nuts, the crazies, the committed Islamists to come after us and come attack us at home and come and kill us wherever we might be. There's a lull right now because ISIS was defeated and because, Al-Qaeda is on its back legs in Afghanistan. But that won't last as we retreat, as we won't win, as we refuse to win. They will come back. They will keep coming back. They will keep killing us until we have a president who actually has the courage, actually has the strategy to win. What you need right now is a strategy. What you need right now is foreign policy. What you need right now is generals who know how to win wars. This administration has none of those. No conception of foreign policy, no strategy for dealing with the Middle East, zero. Negative, day by day it changes. No strategy, no will to win, no concept of what winning looks like, and I fear no qualified generals to actually execute it. The few generals that were part of this administration, none of whom I particularly liked, but have all left because they couldn't handle the kind of random pragmatism that this administration's foreign policy embodies. So no, what we need is a strategy for the Middle East. What we need is a way to defeat our enemies. What we need is not to run away with the tail between our legs, but to re-energize our commitment, not to bring democracy to the Middle East. I don't care about democracy to the Middle East. Not to make these countries prosperous or Western or whatever, anything. A strategy to win, to destroy our enemies. That's it. Strategy is not central planning. And war is not economics. All right. I've had enough of that topic. Let's see. We've got a bunch of super chat questions, and then I've got a few economic points I want to make. Okay. What do you think of John Bolton, Secretary of State? Well, he's not anymore. He was never Secretary of State. He was the National Security Advisor, but he has resigned. He's one of the many adults who have resigned from this administration. In shame, I think, for ever being involved. Is there anything you dislike about his foreign policy? Yes, there's a number of things I dislike about John Bolton's foreign policy, although generally I agree with much of it. Bolton is, let's see, way too nationalistic. He believed that Snowden should be tried for treason. I don't believe that. So he believes that it's okay to listen in on Americans, to get vast quantities of data on Americans in order to make us safer. He's willing to give up way too much liberty in order to supposedly give us safety. I think that's a huge mistake. I also don't think Bolton, I mean, maybe in private he would say this, but I don't know that Bolton is quite willing to be as tough as I think one needs to be in the Middle East in order to win. Now, he knows the threat, he understands the threat, and he's often written good stuff about the threats in the Middle East. I think Bolton, I don't know Bolton's position on other countries, but I'll give you another example about Trump in foreign policy. So the complaint is we have troops all over the world. Last I looked, we had troops in 120 different countries. Why do we have those troops in 120 different countries? Why hasn't Trump done anything about that? Why have those troops not been brought home? They're troops in 120 different countries. We had special forces dying in the middle of Africa. We have special forces in Kenya and Uganda. We have special forces all over Asia. If you're really committed to an America First strategy, if you're really committed to bringing the troops home, start with all those 120 countries. Start with all those places where we don't have organized groups and governments who seek to do harm to Americans. Don't start with the Middle East. Start with Africa. Start with Asia. Start with lots of different places. John Bolton was about as good of a national security advisor that I think you could get in the world in which we live. Again, I don't know much about him beyond the Middle East. I've met him a few times. After 9/11, I thought he was one of the better people. People call him a warmonger, and that's fine. But sometimes you have to go to war. Sometimes war is necessary. And the idea that war is never necessary, that war is never required, is just false. Pacifism will kill you. Now, you could argue about which war was necessary when, but the fact is the United States was attacked over and over and over again, whether embassies abroad or right here in the U.S., over and over again since 1979. And until until you actually do something about it, until you're actually willing to punish those responsible. That will continue. And the only job of the U.S. government, is to protect the individual rights, the property, the lives of Americans. And if the lives of Americans are threatened by a foreign power, by foreign organizations, then the one job that the U.S. government has is to go overseas and destroy them. That's it. We can argue about how you do it. We can argue about strategy on how to do it. But that's what needs to be done. And to the extent John Bolton understood that after 9/11. Now, again, I'm not endorsing everything he stood for. There's certain things I strongly disagree with him. But again, one of the better people on this issue. And more realistic than most. I don't think John Bolton bought into the whole bring democracy to the Middle East. And if he did, I clearly disagree with him on that. I believe, I'll say it one more time, you go, you crush the enemy, you inflict as much pain on them as possible, and you come home. You come home. All right, if you want to ask questions, I see a lot of you asking questions on Facebook. You have to go to YouTube and use the Super Chat feature. Not answering questions unless they have $signs next to them in the Super Chat. The alternative is to support me on the yaronbrookshow.com/support, and then on a regular basis, I elicit questions that I answer once a month from my supporters on through PayPal. So you can go there or you can use Super Chat, but otherwise there's no end to the questions, and I actually can't see the questions very well because what Super Chat does is it highlights them nicely. So I actually know there's a question, I can easily copy and paste it. Do you think the U.S. entering into World War I contributed to causing World War II? I mean, that's an interesting question. There's a sense in which it did, but you know, this is the problem. That the causes of World War II ultimately, the causes of World War I ultimately, are not any particular events that happened, are not particular economic policies, are not particular military policies, are not particular things that happened in this world or that world, this realm or that realm. They're the consequence of ideas. Ideas held by the German population, ideas held by the German intelligentsia, ideas that then manifested themselves ultimately in Nazism, but could have manifested themselves in communism or in a variety of different other ideologies that would have been equally destructive. But it's ideas that drive history. So whether the U.S. enters World War I or not, bad stuff is going to happen in Europe. There's no question about that. What I will say about World War I and the U.S. entering is the U.S. entered, sped up the victory of the, allies of the Brits and the French who we joined with in the defeat of the Axis of Germany. Now, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, I don't think it's a good thing. A lot of American kids died. Why? What was the issue at stake in World War I? What was the issue at stake? What was the fight over? It was over power. It was over who would dominate Europe. It was over whether Germany was an ascending power to be reckoned with. It was over colonialism. It had nothing to do with America. It had nothing to do with American values. It was not about freedom versus oppression. It was about different colonial powers and their various interests in Europe. And I would have let them keep fighting. There's no reason the United States had to enter that war. It was a stupid war. And by the way, if you're interested in war, one of Ayn Rand's best essays is called The Roots of War. The Roots of War. And I think it's in Capitalism, Not Known Ideal. The Roots of War. And she identifies the roots of all war is collectivism. The roots of all war is collectivism in the form of nationalism, in the form of tribalism, in the form of something, right? The roots of World War I are very much associated with the German people and the German rise to become a more significant power, and they wanting recognition in Europe as being the top dog and replacing Britain as the top dog. But the roots of war are always some form of collectivism. Whether it's, the collectivism of communism, or the collectivism of nationalism, or the collectivism of tribalism. Individualists don't want war. They have nothing to gain from it, and everything, i.e. their life, to lose from it. Individualists don't want war. So, wars are a consequence of collectivism on one side or the other. Now, sometimes you have to go to war because it's a self-defense. Somebody attacks you and you have to do something. I think 9/11, post 9/11, you had to do something about the Islamist threat. So, again, so World War I, the United States shouldn't have ended. It should have dragged on. Now, there is a possibility, I guess, that dragging on would have inflicted so much pain on Germany, ultimately, that they would have decided not to do World War II. I doubt it. Because, again, I don't think World War II was a consequence of an existential thing. It was a consequence of ideas. So who knows what would have happened, how it would have all played out. Maybe sitting out World War I, the Soviet Union, the Russians, would have become the dominant power in Europe. I don't know. But the fact is, I do not think that sitting out World War I would have mattered for the long-term horrific nature of what happened in Europe with Nazism and then with communism. Now, I do think, though, that if Germany had been crushed, everybody says World War II happened because Germany was humiliated. No, I think World War II happened because Germany wasn't humiliated enough. Germany ended World War I defeated, but convinced that it could have won. Convinced that if only they'd had a different strategy, if only they'd fought harder, if only they'd done things a little bit differently, they could have won. And that gave them the audacity to try it again. So the only thing that could have prevented World War II in that sense would have been a complete destruction of Germany and the victor announcing and declaring with boldness that it is their Germanic philosophy that got them where they were. And that what they needed was to embrace kind of an Anglo-Saxon philosophical framework. But that would have never happened. All right. Let's see if there's anything else here on foreign policy before we get to some of these others. Okay. What's your thought on geostrategic ideas, thoughts of Zbigniew Brzezinski, especially of his book, The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives? I mean, I don't know, because I've not read the book. If I'd read the book, I'd have, I'm sure, a strong opinion. I don't like Brzezinski. Brzezinski is what's called a realist, I think. Brzezinski, who was he? He was the... under what president was he? He was under Jimmy Carter, is that right? So he was responsible to a large extent for détente. He was responsible for a large extent for the inaction against Iran in 1979. I just think that all of these guys, the realists, and the next question, let me just say, Ayn Rand, so Kissinger's disastrous. He had the same philosophy as Metternich, which also Ayn Rand disliked in regard to foreign policy and power. What is so evil in Maastricht's philosophy of politics? So I think Maastricht, Brzezinski, and Kissinger. I can all lump them together. By the way, again, if you want to ask me a question, you have to ask in the super chat so I can see some questions in the thing. What do they all have in common? They all have in common a unprincipled, strategic view. They don't consider the United States liberty, freedom as good. Communism, fascism is evil. It's all power plays. It's all geopolitical, who's playing power with whom. I don't care about power games. This is also my critique of the way people think of China. I don't care about power games. The job of the U.S. government is to protect the lives and property of American citizens from any foreign threat. So, that's it. I'm not interested in the rise of China, the fall of Russia, the fall of this, the rise of that. I'm interested in what does it take to protect the lives and property of a free America. Now, again, I'm talking about, imagine a free America, right? An America that's basically free. So of a good country, if it was a different country. What is necessary to protect the lives and property of a virtuous nation against bad guys? Foreign policy has basically two purposes. One, free trade. Two, make sure the bad guys don't attack. That's it. So all these games they play, all these theorizing, and Brzezinski and Kissinger, they believed you could negotiate with bad guys. You know why Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize? You know, Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize. Why did he win it? Well, he won it for negotiating a peace deal with North Vietnam, between South Vietnam and North Vietnam. Right? 6 months after he won the Peace Prize, I might have my months wrong, but approximately 6 months afterwards, what happened? What happened? North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam. They took them over and turned them all into commies. So, you can't sign peace deals with North Vietnam. You can't negotiate with North Korea. You can't negotiate with the Iranians. You can't negotiate with the Soviet Union. You don't negotiate with the enemy. You don't negotiate with evil. No negotiations. I wouldn't even negotiate today with the Chinese. It's very simple. As long as they're not a military threat to the United States, zero tariffs. If they become a military threat to the United States, if they are a risk to the lives and property of the U.S., then we're in a state of war. And you do what you need to do with a country that you're in a state of war with. You don't negotiate. There's nothing a good country, nothing a bad, evil regime can give you that is of any value. Of any value. You don't negotiate with evil. You don't negotiate with evil in your personal lives. Shouldn't negotiate with evil people in your personal lives. We don't negotiate with evil in our policing. Don't negotiate with, serial killers. And you never, ever, ever negotiate with evil regimes. Simple principle. Nothing to be gained. And yet Kissinger, Brzezinski, all people who believed that you could negotiate, that there was no, in a sense, in their world, there is no good and evil. There is no good and evil. All right, let's see. All right. Let's do, this one is the closest one. Hayek mentioned the beginning of a totalitarian government coincide with a loss of truth in the public discourse. Do you think that is currently happening in the U.S.? Yes, I do. I think that's absolutely happening in the U.S. I think we have lost all regard for what the truth is. Nobody cares. And it's scary. And it's never been like this in America. So the leftist media completely distorts the truth constantly. Constantly is biased. And it's gotten worse over the last 30 years. It's always been biased. But it's gotten worse to the point where they make up stuff. When I read a quote in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, anyway, I try to always go back to check it with the original because I don't actually believe them. So absolutely, the left has abandoned truth. But so is the right. Donald Trump doesn't believe in the truth. He doesn't care about the truth. The truth doesn't even occur to him. He says whatever he thinks at the moment will work. He is the ultimate product of John Dewey and William James, the pragmatist American philosophers. If it works, it's okay. If it works, it's okay. And therefore, truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is it doesn't work. So yes, I think we're definitely there in the United States. I think the United States is getting ready for an authoritarian. I think we've already seen more and more authoritarian tendencies from Obama to Trump, but even under Bush, executive orders left and right, trying to get around the legislature, ridiculing the Supreme Court, whether it's Obama or Trump, criticizing judges. I think complete breakdown of separation of power and more power being concentrated in the executive. We still have a separation of power to some extent, and the extent to which we have it is still holding everything together. But I can think of a number of scenarios where that will really be tested, and we'll see how authoritarian the American people really are. But certainly, this breakdown in truth and caring about the truth and seeking about the truth relative to what works for me, for my power, against the other group. It's my group against their group, and that's all that matters. That and the willingness to lie and to distort and to pervert in the name of power is definitely a major sign towards authoritarianism. All right, let's go back to the top of what people are asking. What area of economic politics do you think could be helped the most by a practical philosopher similar to what Alex Epstein is doing for energy? Well, I mean, every one of them. I think the area that is most important to do it in, I mean, the two areas that I think are most important to do it in. One is education. I think a campaign to privatize education, to get government out of education, to, a campaign around education saving accounts. So getting the government out of curriculum, getting the government out of hiring teachers, getting the government, I'm willing as a transition to have the government fund education through the parents, but getting the government completely out of the hiring of teachers, the running of schools, and the determination of curriculum. No standardized testing, none of that. All of that goes out the window, and bring in private entrepreneurs into education. Somebody needs to launch a massive campaign around that, build the resource about it, go on a lecturing tour, show the empirical evidence, argue the philosophical points, and do the whole thing, do the whole shebang, just like Alex did with energy. Right? That's one. The second is, I think or in my view, actually the most important industry in our lives, more important maybe even than energy, because it makes energy possible. The foundational industry, the industry that makes all other industries possible, is finance. And finance, banks, investment banks, stock markets, private equity, hedge funds, all of those guys need a robust philosophical, moral, and economic practical defense. And what Alex has done for energy, somebody I wish would do for finance. Don Watkins and I wrote a book in Pursuit of Wealth, which would be the basis, the beginning, the starting point for such a project. You'd have to do tons more work, tons more writing, and lots of speaking. I've got a number of series. One, the Mall Defense of Financial Markets. Another one, the Mall Case for Finance. You can find them online. One is like a many-hour course. The others are lectures. So I've done a lot of lectures on the Mall Defense of Finance. Somebody needs to take that and make it their life mission. It's not me. Somebody needs to organize around that and really devote himself to that. Single-minded on finance. Single-minded on education. So yes, those are the two fields, I think, where you could have an impact and where you have to have an impact for freedom to survive. Unless we make a change to our educational system, we won't survive. And it won't survive spiritually, philosophically. Unless we make a change to our attitude towards finance, we won't survive financially. We won't survive economically. All right, just listen to your inspiring Clavin rebuttal. It's a show I did a few days ago where I, went after Clavin's critique of Ayn Rand. It made me quite dubious about modern conservatives. Absolutely. With that said, what do you think of the older generation of conservatives? Specifically, one of my heroes, Milton Friedman. So I don't think Milton Friedman was a conservative. I think he was more of a small L libertarian. I don't think he considered himself a conservative. I can't think of many good conservatives. Buckley was awful. Irving Kristol, 2 cheers for capitalism, not 3, only 2. You could go on and on and on about the conservatives and how bad they were. And now they're even worse. They're getting worse over time. But they've always been bad. I mean, Ayn Rand criticized the conservatives in the late 1960s. They were already awful then. Now, as for Milton Friedman, I have a mixed view of Milton Friedman. Overall, I think he did a lot of good. I think he's a great communicator. I think he manages to communicate economic issues succinctly, powerfully, with great reason, great examples, and passion. And passion. He's a great speaker. But he also did a lot of damage to the cause by not grounding his economics in a moral foundation, which he could have had because Ayn Rand was right there. I think he retarded the cause by decades. And this is I'll say the same thing about Hayek and Mises and all of them. And people like Rothbard retarded the progress by millennia because they explicitly rejected a rational ethics, even though they were exposed to it, and then embraced a completely, unbelievably irrational philosophy, a subjectivist morality that was completely irrational, that led him to be an anarchist and all that. So I think Rothbard has and will have retarded progress towards true liberty for a long, long time. But Friedman, Hayek, Mises were more influential. And if they had embraced even some of Rand, even the framework Rand presented, the idea that you need a morality of individualism, even if they didn't agree on the details, that we would be today 30, 40 years ahead in terms of our fight for capitalism, for freedom, for liberty. Now, again, I think Friedman, good economic work. I think some of it's bad. His whole monetarist theory, accepts the existence of a Federal Reserve. He accepts the existence of a Fed. He accepts the existence of government money. I think that's a huge mistake, hugely wrong. So I think he He made a mistake by not taking the Austrian economists more seriously. Now, he changed his mind about the Federal Reserve towards the very end of his life and became a free market in banking as well. But his main problem is that he didn't see. He didn't have to be a moral philosopher. He just had to give credit where credit was due to the moral philosophers. It's the only important moral philosopher at the time, which was Ayn Rand. While I'm a fan of some of his economic presentation, particularly his ability to take very abstract concepts and concretize them, simplify them, make them easily graspable to people. It's what I try to do, but he was the master of it. I admire him for that. I think he had real problems and did real harm in other areas. Anyway, so I think the Federal Reserve is a big one. And, he's responsible for the negative income tax and withholding tax is a Milton Friedman idea. It increases efficiency of tax collection, but it's horrible. Imagine if you had to write a check to the government every time you paid your taxes. Maybe people would have a better grasp on how much they pay and how bad it is. All right, any comments on Warren's psyche of being a power-lusting politician? Is she nihilistic like Sanders, where she wants to tear it down and destroy it? I talked about Sanders yesterday, so I encourage you to listen to yesterday's show. Yeah, I mean, she's very much worse than Sanders because she's more intellectual than Sanders. She's smarter than Sanders. She's more organized than Sanders. She has a plan. Sanders is just runs on his personality. Both of them are nihilists. I think she is worse because she's more calculating. She's less emotional. More dangerous. I think they're both motivated by similar things, but I think she is more dangerous. She is more dangerous. But clearly an evil, power-lusting woman. Lies. Again, just like Trump, just like Clinton, just like everybody else in politics today, lies through their teeth. No shame. But that's the world we live in. We live in a world, relates to the question I answered before, where truth doesn't matter anymore. And that is the slope towards authoritarianism. You said you would vote for Sanders if he was nominee. I mean, not really. Why? Would that not be a sanction of his socialist policies? I wouldn't vote for Sanders. I wouldn't vote. But I would prefer that Sanders win, because I couldn't vote for him. But I would prefer that Sanders win. And the reason is that I don't think Sanders would get anything done. Sanders would elicit such a negative response from Republicans that nothing would get done. Whereas Elizabeth Warren, they would work with him. Tucker Carlson, James Cramer, other people associated with the Republicans, I think sympathize with Warren. I think she could work with certain Republican senators. I think she could get stuff done. That scares the bejesus out of me. So I would much prefer somebody who's incompetent and has evil ideas than somebody who is competent and has evil ideas. So I would prefer Sanders to Warren, but I would never vote for Sanders. I would never vote for Trump. I would never vote for Elizabeth Warren. So I would stay out of those elections. All right. In a recent live stream, you said that literature was the art form you knew the least about. If that's true, how can you make an objective assessment of Ayn Rand's qualities as a writer of prose? I mean, I can't. So, there are objectivists who will say Ayn Rand is the greatest writer who ever lived, or the second greatest writer after Victor Hugo, or something like that. I don't make proclamations like that, or I try not to, and if I do, I apologize. I shouldn't. What I say is, I think she is my favorite writer. In terms of her writing, in my opinion, she's second only to Hugo. But I'm not an expert on literature. The experts I know in literature, and I know quite a few, Leonard Peikoff being one of them, say that she is a great writer, and I believe Leonard, so I trust his judgment on such things. But I don't have firsthand. Now, the fact that I'm not an expert in literature doesn't mean I haven't read literature. I've read Ayn Rand. She's a good writer. I've read other people. by comparison, she writes well. I pick up Fountainhead and Alice Shrugged and open up on any random page, and you read some paragraphs where she's describing stuff, and you go, whoa, that's really good. I can have a general sense of what good writing is, but I don't analyze literature. I don't go deep into it. People who do, people who I trust who do, say that she is as good a literary writer as anybody ever has been. I trust their judgment. But granted, it's not completely first-hand based on my knowledge. What I know is she's a good writer. Is she the greatest? That I can't say first-handedly. I believe she is, based on people who I consider experts, who I have lots of evidence to suggest that they're experts, but not based on my analysis of the literature, qua literature, because I haven't done it. Will you vote for Ben Shapiro in 2024? Well, I'm hoping, against hope, that he'll run in 2020, because in 2020 it'd be easier for me to vote for Ben Shapiro, because I would vote him over Donald Trump in a heartbeat. I don't know who I'll vote for in 2024. Again, I don't vote for president. As a Puerto Rican resident, I don't vote for president. But I think Ben Shapiro is as good, would be, potentially, as good ideologically a Republican as anybody in the Republican field. Now, I hate some of his views. His view on abortion, his view on gay marriage, although he would want the state to stay out of gay marriage, is my understanding. My view, I think some of his views on social issues are wrong, but I don't get the sense that he wants the government to solve all the problems. And I think he would do a lot of good on the economic side, because I think he's about as close to somebody being pro-capitalist as anybody is who considers himself a Republican. But who knows by 2024 what Ben Shapiro is going to be like. I've been disappointed in his caving to his audience by being nice to Trump. I don't think he should be. I think he's caved. I think he's compromised. I wish he didn't. I think he's better than that. I think early on he was very, very antagonistic towards Trump, and I respected him more when he was than I do now. All right, I've noticed in science fiction movies the antagonists tend to be evil corporations. This is the case with Weyland-Yutani. In Aliens, absolutely. OCP in RoboCop, Cyberdyne in Terminator. Well, I mean, it's in everything, right? It's in Aliens, RoboCop, Terminator, but it's in almost every movie. Why only science fiction? If you want a villain, if you want an ominous villain, they're usually corporations or rich guys. They're almost always the bad guys. There was once a study done, it was done a long time ago. I haven't seen an updated version. I think this was done in the late 90s. That over 50% of all the murders on television are committed by businessmen. Businessmen commit almost no murders in real life. But in television, they commit 50% plus of all the murders. Jennifer says, in Avatar, of course. Well, Avatar is just an anti-human movie, and corporations are just the manifestation of our humanity as evil beings. So I think it's obvious, right? We hate profit. We hate wealth. And behind it is a hatred of self-interest, a hatred of people pursuing their self-interest, people pursuing profit, people pursuing values, their own values, people pursuing their own happiness. So behind all of this is a hatred of the pursuit of happiness. And corporations are the manifestation of that, because what are they about? They're about making money. It's a deep hatred of capitalism. That exists in Hollywood everywhere, and all the movies are filled with this kind of attitude. And again, it's a deep hatred, whether coming from the right or from the left, of profit, corporations. You see it now with the right and the left going after big tech. But it manifests itself in the same way that all corporations are evil. And you could go on and on. You gave 4 or 5 examples. You could have dozens and dozens and dozens of examples. What are your views on the musician that goes by the name of Gene Simmons? Now, Gene Simmons was whom? What's his stage name? People like Yaron and Simmons make me want to be a better person. Simmons is the guy who cut off chicken heads on stage, right? Is that who he is? Kiss, yeah. I was never a fan of Kiss. I'm not a fan of that kind of rock and roll. I don't know much about Gene Simmons as a human being. I didn't like the. I didn't like the music, and I didn't like the persona on stage. But he might be a wonderful human being that you should emulate. I just don't know. In the primaries, do you vote against Trump or for someone like, say, Andrew Yang? It's optional in my state. So you mean, should you stay in the Republican Party and vote against Trump? I would do that only if there was any kind of viable candidate who seemed like they would at least garner a few percentage points, that it would be recognized. Otherwise, I would vote in the Democratic Party for the best candidate out there, which might be Yang. I've criticized Yang and I've really gone after Yang, but it might be that he's the best. And then I would vote for him. The fact is, you're not going to defeat Trump. So your protest vote in the Republican Party would only mean something if it was large, if there was enough people doing the same thing as you are, enough of them. With the Democratic primary, I still think it's open. Now, we'll see when the primary comes around. Ask the question again then, because by then it could be a two-man race, and you should just vote against Elizabeth Warren, no matter who is in the Democratic Party against her. Just vote against her to somebody who can beat her. So it's going to depend on where we are in the primaries. So ask me at that point. Ask me when we get there. All right, I think, unless there's another Super Chat question, I think we're going to call it a night. These economic issues that I was going to talk about, wages, wage growth, stuff like that, we'll talk about another time. Probably talk about next time I do a show. Probably the next show is going to be Saturday midday, probably 3 o'clock. Oh, one minute. I read The Beautiful Tree, a book recommendation of yours. Really wonderful and important. Thank you. Yeah, A Beautiful Tree would be one of the books that would launch the education revolution. It would have to be at one of the books that would be promoted by an organization that was dedicated to changing educational policy in the world and in the United States. And A Beautiful Tree is a book written by a UK scholar whose name escapes me right now. You can find it on Amazon. It's a beautiful book about private schools in exactly the places you would never expect them. Private schools in the slums of Calcutta, private schools in the slums of Nigeria, private schools in the poorest places on the planet. And it really gives you hope that if you can have private schools in those places, you can have private schools anywhere. And what a disgrace it is that in our rich countries, we don't embrace private education. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. And I will see you all